the golden silence of dusk, long after the market stalls are cleared and the Nile-S waters have whispered their way past papyrus reeds, ancient Egypt begins its quiet descent into sleep. The world doesn't shut down suddenly. It exhales. A slow, collective lull falls over the land like a linen sheet draped across a tired body. The heat of the day begins to ease. The sun, worshipped as Ra, the eternal traveler across the sky, finally lowers behind the western horizon, the side of death and decay. But for the living, this was not an end. It was a daily return to softness, to coolness, to rest. This moment, when last ferry docks and the farmers rinsed their feet from the day's toil, was sacred. In ancient Egypt, nightfall wasn't merely the absence of light. It was transformation, a magical interlude when spirits wandered freely, when gods visited dreams, and when the human body, broken from labor, could finally return to stillness. Sleep was more than a necessity. It was part of a spiritual system, one that connected life, death, and divinity. To sleep was to rehearse death. It was to surrender to a temporary stillness, hoping to wake once more in resinue dawn. The ancient Egyptians lived by a cosmic rhythm. The rising of the sun signified renewal, its setting a symbolic death. Night belonged to Osiris, the god of the underworld. But before souls met Osiris permanently, they did so nightly in their dreams. Imagine a laborer from Memphis. He returns home as the last light flickers off the limestone blocks he spent all day moving. His hands are cracked, feet swollen, but he's not done yet. First, he bathes in water from a communal pot. Then perhaps his wife rubs a mix of herbs, frankincense, maybe cedar onto his back. His bed, a woven palm mat on a cool floor, his pillow, a carved wooden headrest, slightly curved. No fluff, no down, just enough lift to keep his head from touching the earth where demons might creep. Sleep wasn't only about the body. It was about keeping the soul safe. Demons were thought to roam the earth during the night, drawn to the vulnerability of sleeping humans. So people prayed. Not dramatic, loud chants, but whispered supplications. Protect my Ka, some might say the Ka being the vital essence, the spiritual double that needed guidance while its physical counterpart lay unconscious. Wealthier Egyptians officials, priests, scribes had more elaborate routines. Their homes offered separate bedrooms. A servant might light incense. Another would anoint the sleeper with scented oils. Their beds were raised and sometimes even featured footboards and headrests carved with protective symbols. Linen sheets, cool to the touch, covered their legs. At their side, small statues of Bes, the dwarf god with lion features, protector of households and sleep. He was not handsome. That was the point. His hideousness scared away the real ooglies, nightmares, evil spirits, creeping death. Meanwhile, the stars above weren't just decoration. The Egyptians tracked their movements carefully. They knew that Sirius, the dog star, rising before the sun, predicted the annual flooding of the Nile, but stars also marked time. Certain constellations indicated hours of the night, like a natural clock spinning silently overhead. And children? Children were rocked gently on reed cradles. Mothers or nursemaids would hum softly, songs passed down for generations. These weren't just lullabies. They were incantations, words meant to soothe but also to shield. Some mothers dabbed a mix of crushed lavender and powdered resin onto their children. Estos believed to attract sweet dreams and ward off insects. The city itself didn't sleep all at once. Temples remained active. Priests of Amen or Horus or Ptah worked by lamplight, reciting verses and making offerings. The gods must be honored even at midnight, especially at midnight. Beyond the city limits, in the vast fields or near the edge of the desert, others camped beneath open skies. Soldiers, desert couriers, tomb workers. These people faced different fears, jackals, sandstorms, the eerie silence of the unknown. But even here, rituals persisted. A simple whisper to Isis, a charm tied around the ankle. A symbol etched into the sand before laying down. Dreams were powerful. Egyptians believed they held messages from beyond, perhaps warnings, perhaps prophecies. A dream of a snake could mean treachery. A falcon might signify divine protection. There were even official dream interpreters. people who studied what dreams meant and how to respond to them. But not all dreams were welcome. Some were chaotic, violent, frightening. That's why many wore amulets to bed, especially ones inscribed with protective spells. Tombs have even been found with dream manuals buried with the deceased just in case they continued dreaming in the afterlife. Eventually, the night stretched thin. Just before dawn, when the air held the coldest bite, the city stirred. Fishermen rose to beat the river's current. Bakers kneaded dough in silence. A lone ibis cried out from a sycamore fig tree. This signaled Ra's return. And so, one by one, the sleepers woke, not rushed, not blinking into blue light or squinting at alarms. They simply opened their eyes and began again. Sleep in ancient Egypt was not passive. It was spiritual, physical, and protective. A liminal state between this life and the next, between toil and dream, between noise and divine silence. And that is how they slept beneath the stars, beside the river, watched by gods. In ancient Egypt, how you slept said everything about who you were. From gold-plated bed frames to straw mats shared with siblings, your bed wasn't just a place of rest, it was a declaration. A spiritual alignment, a social symbol, a message to the gods, and maybe to your neighbors. Let's start at the top. For the elite, the pharaohs, nobles, and high priests' sleep was an extension of divinity. Their beds weren't merely functional. They were sacred objects of art carved from ebony or imported cedar wood. Many stood on legs shaped like lions' paws or bulls' hooves, elevating the sleeper above the dusty earth because evil spirits, it was believed, crept low along the floor. If you were important, you didn't sleep near the demons. And the headrest. Imagine a half-moon block of polished wood under your neck. No soft feathers, no cushion. The ancient Egyptian headrest was firm and symbolic, raising the head, protecting the breath and keeping watch for wandering spirits. For the pharaoh, some were even inscribed with spells to protect the Ka, the vital soul double, while the body rested. Now picture this, a royal bed frame gleaming with inlays of ivory and gold, a linen sheet as fine as spider silk, a servant lighting incense at the foot of the bed, another rubs fragrant oil, perhaps lotus or frankincense, into your feet. A cat curls at your side, but not just for company. Cats were divine. They protected the home from vermin and malevolent spirits alike. This was not sleep, it was ceremony. But elite comfort wasn't always about softness, it was about order. About ritual, the gods watched even when eyelids were closed. Next, we descend a step on the social ladder. The priests who served the temples also held sleep in reverence, but their routines were more austere. Many fasted before bed. Some slept in sanctuaries within the temple grounds, believing it brought them closer to divine dreams. Their bedding was clean but minimal, a frame, a hide, maybe a thin linen wrap. A life of devotion didn't call for down pillows. And what of the middle class? The scribes, merchants, and artisans, their homes were modest but comfortable. Courtyards allowed breezes to cool sleeping areas. Wooden beds stretched with crisscrossed leather thongs offered support. Windows were covered with gauzy linen to keep out flies while letting moonlight slip in. Sleep here was a shared affair. Perhaps a husband and wife with children nearby. A clay lamp flickered in the corner. A jug of water sat close at hand. Before sleeping, a simple prayer might be whispered to Base, to Isis, to Thoth, whoever might keep dreams peaceful and thieves far away. Sometimes, in these homes, the family cat was more than a pet. It was a guardian. The belief in animal protectors ran deep. Dogs kept physical threats away. Cats protected the soul. Headrests here were simpler, just unadorned wood. Blankets, often linen sheets, maybe an animal pelt in colder seasons. Comfort depended less on gold and more on family warmth. And now we reach the bedrock of society, the farmers, the builders, the laborers of the Nile. For these hard-working Egyptians, beds were sometimes nothing more than a woven mat. Some slept in courtyards beneath the stars. Others lay rolled up in reed rugs, wrapped like pre-mummies for warmth. Privacy was rare. And sleep often came fast-earned through sheer exhaustion. Imagine a builder in Deir el-Medina, the workers' village for the Valley of the Kings. After a long day chiseling tombs, he returns home to a single-room house. His family eats lentils and bread by lamplight. Maybe there's music, maybe not. But eventually they lay down side by side. The youngest child holds a toy shaped like a crocodile. The mother whispers a protective charm. Someone places a simple amulet beneath the mat just in case. Even here, among soot and sweat, sleep had its rituals, not luxurious but meaningful. The stars above were the same stars that shone on pharaohs. And in the eyes of the gods, everyone's dreams mattered. Finally, we must not forget the enslaved. Many slept outside kitchens or near storage areas. They often shared mats, huddled against the wind. But even in these circumstances, there was care, a lullaby sung low, a charm made of bone or stone, an old story whispered before sleep. Their beds may have been rough, but their spirits were resilient. And their dreams perhaps of freedom or divine justice mattered too. Egyptian beds, then, were more than furniture. They were hieroglyphs of daily life. A wooden platform said you had a carpenter in the family. A headrest inscribed with protection meant you feared what lay beyond dreams. A scratched mat near a fire pit said survival is sacred. In this desert land of towering gods and humble grain, everyone slept. Not equally, but together, under one sky. A civilization cradled in belief, and lulled to rest each night by the breath of the Nile, because in Egypt, even your bed told a story. And if you listened closely, it whispered who you were. When the grandeur of gold fades and temple walls fall silent, we find ourselves in the homes of the ordinary, those who tilled the earth, hauled stones, and raised children along the banks of the Nile. And it is here, in the dim, smoky rooms of Egypt's working class, that sleep was at once the humblest and most universal of acts. For the average Egyptian, sleep came with few luxuries but many rituals. Their homes were a small one, sometimes 2 rooms made of sun-dried mud brick. Roofs were flat, often used for storage or summer sleeping under the stars. These were not palaces. They were shelters. And within these modest walls, nightly rest took its shape. The typical family bed was not a bed at all. It was a woven mat laid over packed earth or clay floors, sometimes raised slightly on bricks to keep out crawling insects and creeping damp. Mats were made from palm fibers or reeds materials plentiful along the Nile. They were simple, replaceable, and often shared by more than one person. Most commoners had no pillows. Instead, if anything, they used wooden headrests, just like the elites, but plain, uncarved, and sometimes passed down for generations. These curved wooden cradles lifted the head just enough to keep the neck elevated. It wasn't comfortable by modern standards, but comfort wasn't the goal. Sleep, like everything else in the life of a farmer or mason, was about survival. And it wasn't just the parents. Children, siblings, sometimes grandparents all shared the same sleep space. Privacy didn't exist. The entire family went to sleep as one, often wrapped in large pieces of linen or animal skins during cooler months. They didn't have blankets in the way we do. Instead, they used linen cloaks or spare garments. In the summer, they might sleep uncovered, the desert heat still clinging to the air even after the sun disappeared behind the western cliffs. Nighttime was not silent. Flies and mosquitoes hummed, dogs barked in alleyways. Donkeys brayed from nearby courtyards. And just beyond the edge of town, the wild sounds of jackals and hyenas drifted in with the wind. Insects crawled, wind shifted. Still, the body gave in. Rest came because it had to. In the village of Deir el-Medina, home to the workers who built the tombs of the pharaohs, we see vivid snapshots of commoner sleep. Their houses were small but skillfully arranged. Rooms were separated by low walls or doorways. Sleeping spaces were tucked into corners, where one could lay down on a rush mat beside a hearth still warm from the evening fire. In some cases, beds were built into the architecture itself, a raised platform of mud brick, smoothed and leveled, upon which bedding was placed. It was low-tech but effective, and when the weather allowed, families took to the rooftop's cooler, breezier, and farther from vermin. Sleep wasn't a quiet affair. Many fell asleep to stories. Old legends of gods and monsters, myths of Riz nightly battle through the underworld, or personal tales about an ancestor's encounter with a sacred ibis or dreams that foretold good harvests. Children held onto doll simple shapes of clay or wood. Some were carved like hippos, crocodiles, or cats. Others were just smooth stones or stuffed bundles of linen. These were more than toys. They were comfort against the unknown. Even among the poor, amulets were common. A small figure of base, a piece of faience shaped like an eye, a bead with a carved glyph. Many of these were homemade, tucked beneath a child's sleeping mat or tied around the wrist with twine. It didn't take gold to believe in protection. Before sleep, some households burned herbs, papyrus, henna, or bits of myrrh if they could afford it. The smoke was thought to ward off pests and spirits alike. A brief prayer might be whispered. Keep us safe until the sun returns, or let no evil cross our door. The words were short, quiet, and repeated nightly, no temple needed. Dreams held meaning for everyone, rich or poor. A farmer who dreamt of a scorpion might wake worried. A pregnant mother who dreamt of a cat might take it as a good omen. While the educated kept scrolls and dream manuals, the commoners passed their interpretations by word of mouth, one generation to the next. Sometimes sleep had to wait. During harvests or temple construction seasons, men worked until exhaustion. They might come home, eat flatbread and lentils, drink a jug of beer, and collapse. Their wives, after putting children to sleep, might stay awake spinning thread by oil light or preparing dough for morning bread. And yet, in these small spaces, sleep came, warm bodies in tight quarters, the scent of smoke, dust, and family. A tangle of limbs, a hand resting lightly on another's back. In these moments, life slowed. The stars moved silently over thatched rooftops. The Nile murmured somewhere out of sight. There was no alarm, no snooze button, just the gradual lightening of the sky and the early call of a rooster or ibis. Children stirred first. Mothers rose to knead bread. Fathers stretched, rubbed sore shoulders, and reached for sandals. The sleep of the commoner was short, often restless, and always earned. But it was also human deeply, instinctively human. And in those hours of shared silence beneath scratchy linen and against a rough mat, the poor of Egypt slept in the shadow of eternity. Because whether king or cook, all Egyptians slept beneath the same stars and dreamed in the same language. As the sun dipped behind the desert horizon and cast long shadows across temple walls, the ancient Egyptians did not simply go to bed. Sleep was not something they fell into. It was something they prepared for, with care, with ritual, with reverence, because night was not safe, and what lay in the dark both inside and outside the mind was not to be trusted. To live in ancient Egypt was to be deeply aware of the powers that moved unseen. Spirits, gods, demons, ancestors. They were always near, but especially active at night. And so, just as the priests of Karnak offered incense at dawn, everyday people made their own humble offerings before sleep. A typical evening began with water. Washing one's face, hands, and feet with cool water from a ceramic jar was not merely for cleanliness. It was symbolic washing off the heat, sweat, and impurities of the day. In wealthier homes, servants brought perfumed water perhaps with lotus or crushed mint while commoners fetched it from shared courtyards or nearby wells. After washing came protection. Children were tucked in, not just with linen but with amulets. The lion dwarf god base, who guarded homes and women in labor, was especially beloved. Parents placed small wooden carvings of base near the sleeping space. His fierce face, tongue sticking out, was meant to terrify the terrors of the night. Others favored Tauret, the pregnant hippo goddess, who was both absurd and holy. Her rotund, smiling figure was carved into house walls or painted onto pots. She stood at the threshold of many homes, watching, waiting, guarding. These rituals weren't loud or theatrical. They were quiet, intimate. Someone might whisper a line of protection as they lay down. May your feet not walk in darkness. May your dreams be pure. These weren't formal prayers, just daily mantras, passed from mother to child, neighbor to neighbor. In many homes, incense was burned. Fragrant resin placed into small clay burners glowed gently, filling rooms with smoke meant to cleanse and protect. Frankincense was favored by those who could afford it. Myrrh, too. The less wealthy might burn palm or tamarisk bark. The idea wasn't luxury, it was cleansing, smoke that carried worry away. Some placed herbs under their sleeping mats, chamomile, fennel, even garlic, not just for scent, but for their supposed powers. It was believed certain herbs could repel evil, attract good spirits, and ease the journey into dreams. Speaking of dreams, preparation for them was often as detailed as for sleep itself. Dreams were not frivolous. They were messages. The gods spoke through them. So many Egyptians kept objects close to their resting space that might encourage good dreams. Small figurines of Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, carvings of Horus eyes, pieces of polished stone shaped like ankhs. If a person hoped to dream of a deceased loved one, they might whisper that person's name several times before bed, or place a cherished object beneath the mat. The boundary between living and dead was thin in sleep. And then there were the rituals of sound. In some households, especially those with children, lullabies were sung. Not just songs to soothe, but chants believed to create a barrier of peace around the home. The lyrics have mostly been lost to time, but references survive. Melodies that invoked deities, that praised the safety of night, that begged the stars to keep watch. In cities, the buzz of the day dimmed, but did not disappear. A vendor might make a final call. A neighbor might argue softly across a courtyard. The creak of shutters, the click of sandals on stone. But indoors, the rituals continued. Candles or oil lamps were placed near doorways. Not for light, necessarily, but for guidance, for the soul double, which was believed to wander during sleep. A small flame ensured it could find its way home. Some families kept pet cats nearby. Revered not only for their companionship, cats were symbols of the goddess-basket goddess of home, protection, and women. A sleeping cat in the corner meant the goddess herself might be near. For those who had recently lost someone, nighttime rituals took on heavier meaning. The recently bereaved often placed burial shrouds or small tokens near their beds, hoping for a dream visit. They might sleep facing west, the land of the dead. Others kept vigil, sleeping lightly, waiting for a message or sign from beyond. The educated elite, particularly scribes and priests, sometimes slept with scrolls nearby, not to read, but to absorb their power. Written words were holy. A hymn or incantation penned on a piece of papyrus was believed to have protective energy even when folded and tucked under a bed frame. Some men, particularly those working on temple grounds, fasted or abstained from physical pleasures before bed, believing it purified the body and made dreams more truthful. This wasn't common among all classes, but it shows how seriously some took the nighttime. Even the act of lying down had symbolic meaning. To sleep on one's left side was thought to calm the heart. To face east toward the rising sun was considered a way to welcome renewal. Children often copied their parents, curling in tight patterns, mimicking their breath, falling into sleep under the same stars. And when sleep finally arrived, it was both physical and metaphysical. A letting go, a passage, a surrender to the gods who governed the dreamscape. Because in ancient Egypt, night was never just absence. It was filled with scent, sound, protection, and prayer. With gods perched in corners, with spirits circling rooftops, with families bundled close, their breaths sensing like the rhythm of a sacred chant. And when the final lamp was extinguished and only the stars remained, the rituals had done their work. Sleep came, and with it the other world. In ancient Egypt, sleep was not an escape from the world, it was an entryway into another one. For when the eyes closed and the body lay still, the soul began its journey. And at the heart of that nightly voyage was the dream. To the Egyptians, dreams were not idle flickers of the mind. They were revelations, divine messages, secrets slipped through the veil of consciousness. A whisper from a god, a warning from the dead, a glimpse of something the waking world could not offer. They believed dreams had power. It was not a metaphor, it was fact. There were entire sections of temples dedicated to what they called dream incubation, the process of preparing to receive sacred dreams. People traveled miles to sleep in holy places. At the temple of Serapis or the sanctuaries of Imhotep, pilgrims rested on cool stone floors beneath incense-heavy air, hoping to be granted a dream that healed, advised, or absolved. And when they did dream, they listened. If someone dreamt of a cat, it might mean a blessing from Bastet. If they saw a crocodile, danger from the Nile. A falcon might be a message from Horus, watchfulness, clarity, but the symbols varied. Dreams were deeply personal, but there were patterns, and so the Egyptians kept dream books. Yes, dream books. Archaeologists have found fragments of papyri that listed hundreds of dream symbols and their meanings. One such text, now called the Ramesside Dream Book, offers interpretations like, if a man sees himself eating crocodile flesh, it means he will become a mighty official. If a man dreams of his own death, it is a sign of long life. To dream of drinking warm beer, it is an omen of illness. These texts weren't hidden in libraries. They were shared, copied, sometimes inscribed into tombs. People wanted their descendants to know, this is what the gods are saying. Learn the language of dreams. Even more fascinating is how common people practiced dream interpretation without scrolls. It was communal. You told your wife, your neighbor, your cousin. They compared it to their own. If two people had the same dream on the same night, it was no coincidence, it was divine urgency. Some scribes even became dream interpreters by trade. They were consulted like prophets. People asked, what does it mean if I saw a snake in a basket? Or, I dreamt I was flying. Am I cursed? These men would consult their papyri or their own spiritual intuition and give an answer, sometimes reassuring, sometimes not, but not all dreams were welcomed. Nightmares, too, were part of the divine language. A visit from a chaotic god like Set could mean war or personal conflict. To see yourself drowning in the Nile, a warning. To be chased by a shadow, a sign that your soul was troubled. These dreams weren't ignored. They were countered with ritual. One might sleep with a protective amulet the next night, or burn cedar, or place salt under the bed. Others visited priests, who could offer a cleansing rite or recite spells to banish troubling visions. Children, especially, were vulnerable. Parents kept charms near their sleeping places. Dolls shaped like lions, amulets tied with blue thread. Not just for nightmares, but for night terrors, what we might now call sleep paralysis. Egyptians believed it was a demon sitting on your chest, and the only way to prevent its return was through spiritual defense. It's easy to think this sounds strange, superstitious, but consider this. To the Egyptians, the dream world and the real world were mirrors. What happened in one affected the other. A prophecy in a dream could change the course of a life. Even pharaohs recorded their dreams. One of the most famous examples comes from the dream stele of Thutmose IV as a young prince. He supposedly fell asleep near the Great Sphinx and dreamed the Sphinx spoke to him. It promised that if Thutmose cleared the sands burying its body, he would become king. He did, and he did. That story wasn't meant as fiction, it was truth, public truth, carved in stone. For the elite, dreams were often tied to state decisions. Should a war be waged? Should a temple be built? Some of these answers came not from councils, but from sleep. A dream, interpreted the right way, could shift the course of a kingdom. And in the private sphere, dreams carried weight in love, illness, family, and travel. A woman who dreamed of being covered in lotus petals might take it as a sign of coming marriage. A man who dreamed of losing a tooth might fear the death of a family member. These dreams haunted them not because they were unreal, but because they were too real. That's why rituals before bed were so serious. Why incense was burned? Why names were whispered? The Egyptians weren't afraid of sleep itself. They were afraid of what they might see. But dreams weren't always warnings. They could be comfort. Many believed they could speak to the dead in dreams. A mother who lost her son might dream of him sitting beside her, offering figs. A father might see his grandfather standing by a sycamore, smiling. These weren't illusions, they were visitations, gifts. The line between living and dead blurred when the mind left its cage and wandered into the unseen. And when the sleeper awoke, they did not forget. They pondered, they consulted others. They adjusted their behavior accordingly. Because in ancient Egypt, dreams weren't tucked away like secrets. They were woven into daily life, into choices, into rituals, into power. Sleep was a doorway. Dreams were the message. And for those who listened, the gods sometimes answered. In ancient Egypt, sleep and death were not merely siblings, they were reflections of one another. When night fell and the people lay down their heads, they were not just resting. They were practicing. Sleep, in all its mystery and silence, was the rehearsal for eternity. The Egyptians had no word that meant death in the modern sense. Instead, they spoke of going west, or joining the beautiful west, the place where the sun disappeared each night. And so, to close your eyes and fall into darkness was not feared, it was expected, it was part of the cycle. Even their language tells the story. The word for sleep, nejem, also meant peace or sweetness. Death was mat keper, a transformation, a becoming, and they believed the nightly sleep allowed the soul to dip into that realm, if only for a while. So it's no surprise that their burial customs mirrored sleep. Tombs were not just graves, they were eternal bedrooms, resting places. The body was carefully arranged, arms at the side or crossed. Head turned slightly, wrapped in linen like someone tucked into bed. Amulets were placed as if for protection during the night. Spells from the Book of the Dead were read aloud, like bedtime stories whispered by priests. The journey into the underworld, as described in sacred texts, reads much like the passage into dreams, uncertain, symbolic, full of judgment and revelation. But why did they see sleep as sacred training? Because they believed that during sleep, the Bada part of the soul with wings left the body and traveled. It visited the land of the dead. It met with gods, with ancestors, it explored places unknown, and in the morning it returned. If it didn't, you didn't wake up. This belief infused every bedtime act with cosmic weight. Lying down to sleep was symbolically lying down to die, and waking up was a kind of rebirth. Ra himself did it each day. He descended into the underworld at night, fought off chaos, and rose again at dawn. Humans followed his example, not just in myth, but in routine. That's why the positioning of the bed mattered. Many Egyptians aligned their sleep to the east or north, orienting themselves toward rebirth or heavenly guidance. Some tombs, too, face east to greet the rising sun, as if to say, let this one wake again someday. Even sleep architecture echoed this thinking. In the tombs of nobles and kings, the burial chambers often included carved or painted images of the deceased lying on a bed, surrounded by offerings, bread, beer, flowers, clothing, just as one might place beside a living sleeper. Some even included sculpted headrests and furniture so that comfort followed the soul into death. In these sacred chambers, Base and Tarid appear not just as home guardians, but as eternal watchers. The same spirits that protected a child's sleep would now protect them forever. Some tombs contained intricate false doors, meant to allow the soul double to enter and leave, just like it did during sleep. These doors were painted or carved on the west wall of tombs. Offerings were left before them. Priests would call out the names of the dead to invite the soul back, much as a mother might whisper to a dreaming child. And while death rituals were complex, they were also deeply familiar, because they echoed what every Egyptian did every night: prepare the body, protect the soul, surrender to silence. Among the most poignant examples of this is the tomb of Senejem, a worker in Deir el-Medina. Inside, painted walls show Senejem and his wife sleeping peacefully beneath palm trees, being waited on in paradise. They were not kings, but their dreams were honored. Sleep was the blueprint. It was in dreams that ancestors gave warnings or approval, in dreams that gods hinted at future events. The boundary between sleep and death was not a wall, it was a curtain, thin, shifting, occasionally lifted. This belief shaped behavior, even for the living. If you had a nightmare, you might burn incense the next night to ward off its return. If you slept without dreaming, some worried it meant the soul had been blocked perhaps by impurity or by a spiritual offense. Remedies existed for this. A priest might prescribe a spell, a bath, a fast, because uninterrupted sleep meant harmony. A clear channel between this life and the next? Even pharaohs took this seriously. In the Valley of the Kings, golden beds were buried with Tutankhamun designed to cradle him for eternity. Not just display pieces, but tools for cosmic rest. In the tomb of Queen Hedefires, a bed frame, headrest, and canopy were found carried with her into the afterlife, just as one would prepare for a long, important journey. This connection between sleep and death shaped more than funerary customs. It shaped how Egyptians lived. People avoided lying on their backs in certain circumstances, believing it made them vulnerable to spirits. Others chose specific sleeping postures on the side, with knees drawn to mimic fetal rest, a posture of both safety and rebirth. In some texts, the dead are described as sleeping with the gods, not as gone, not as lost, but as resting and one day to wake again. This metaphor made grief bearable. When a child died, mourners said, he sleeps in the arms of Osiris. When a farmer passed, neighbors spoke of his last rest beneath the west. It softened the edge of mortality. It reminded the living that their loved ones were simply further along in the journey. And so, each night, the act of sleep was layered with meaning. Not just rest, not just escape, but surrender, practice, trust, the trust that your soul would return. The trust that your name would be remembered. The trust that one day, when you closed your eyes for the final time, your journey would continue just as it had always begun, in darkness, with a breath and a dream. Even in a land as spiritually prepared as ancient Egypt, sleep was not always peaceful. The same people who believed in protective gods and nightly rituals also knew the dark could be restless, the mind unkind. Sleep ailments, nightmares, insomnia, and strange visitations were very real and very feared, but they didn't call it sleep paralysis or anxiety or stress. They had their own explanations, ones shaped by gods, demons, curses, and unseen spirits. Let's start with the most dreaded sleep disturbance of all, the night demon. The Egyptians believed that certain beings, invisible and malevolent, haunted the sleeping. They called them Aku or Mut spirits, restless souls or forces of chaos that crept through cracks and keyholes. If someone woke in the middle of the night, frozen, unable to breathe, heart pounding, they believed they were being held down by a spirit. To stop this, you'd need protection. Many homes had charms specifically designed to ward off nighttime visitors. A carving of Base was one. His lion-like face and squat body weren't cute, but terrifying enough to frighten away other terrors. Mothers placed them near babies' beds. Adults slept with them under pillows or tied around the wrist. In more severe cases, sufferers went to temple healers. The priest-physicians of Egypt were not just doctors, they were part magician, part psychologist, part exorcist. They offered spells to be recited before sleep, amulets soaked in oils, rites involving fumigation, burning herbs and resins to clear the air of lingering spirits. And what of nightmares? A nightmare wasn't just a bad dream, it was a message. But from whom? A god. A ghost? An angry ancestor? If a dream showed blood, drowning, fire, or shadows, it could signal an imbalance. The dreamer might have violated a taboo, or someone might be working a curse against them. To soothe this fear, priests sometimes prescribed a ritual sleep outside the home a night spent on temple grounds, under divine watch. If a better dream followed, it meant the spell had worked. Children were especially vulnerable. Mothers often sang protective lullabies, not just for sleep, but for safe sleep. They applied oils to their children's feet and temples. Some used protective knots, tied with dyed thread, believed to trap any negative spirits trying to suck the breath from a child during the night. The idea of breath theft was real and terrifying. Some Egyptians believed that evil spirits didn't kill with weapons, but by stealing the breath during sleep. This idea likely came from observing people who died suddenly in the night, now we might say heart failure or stroke. Then, it was a spirit who snuck in when protections failed. Another common affliction, restlessness, what we might call insomnia. An Egyptian who couldn't sleep wouldn't think of it as an overactive mind. They'd wonder, is my soul agitated? Have I failed to honor a god? Have I spoken ill of someone? Guilt, unspoken wrongs, and impurity were all reasons sleep might not come. The solution? Purification. They might wash in cool water under the moonlight, say prayers to Thoth or Mat. Drink a mix of herbs like poppy or mandrake steeped in wine. Some even chewed lotus petals, believed to calm the body and open the soul to rest. In some medical papyri, like the Ebers papyrus, there are references to wind in the belly or head causing unrest. These winds were not actual breezes, but energies. If they were blocked or disturbed, sleep would not come. A priest might prescribe a poultice or a massage with scented oils to release the blockage. There were also protective beds. Yes, entire bed frames inscribed with spells and images. In wealthier homes, you might find headrests carved with divine eyes or footboards featuring lotus blossoms, a symbol of rebirth and harmony. These weren't decoration. They were medicine, spiritual armor. Some people even carried small sleep scrolls, fragments of papyri with sacred verses tucked under mats or in amulet boxes. Words themselves had power. A sacred phrase, properly written, could drive away the shadows of the mind. And what of dreams that repeated? The same terrifying vision again and again, this was viewed with suspicion. Perhaps the dreamer was being hunted not by a person, but by a force. In such cases, entire households might perform cleansing rituals, salt sprinkled in corners, bread left out for wandering spirits, a clay figure of the dream creature made and then shattered, symbolically breaking the nightmare's hold. Then there were those who spoke during sleep, or walked. Yes, they knew about sleepwalking. They believed it was the Kada soul double, restless and unmoored. A person who wandered in sleep was treated with both caution and reverence. You didn't shake them or wake them. You watched. You whispered their name. You waited for the Ka to return. Sometimes these sleep disturbances were linked to the stars. Egyptians tracked star patterns obsessively. Certain nights, especially just before the heliacal rising of Sirius, were considered dangerous. Portals, some said, were more open. Dreams on those nights could be especially vivid or dangerous. Children were kept close. Lamps were kept burning. And it wasn't just individuals who suffered. Communities feared collective unrest. If many people began having strange dreams, or couldn't sleep, or felt a heaviness in the air, they might believe a curse was upon them. Priests would conduct night vigils. Statues would be cleansed, offerings made. Because in Egypt, sleep was a shared experience. A spiritual state, not merely a physical one. So when someone said, "I did not sleep well," it wasn't just idle complaint, it was a warning. Something was wrong in the body, in the soul, or in the world beyond. And though they lacked our vocabulary, no REM cycles, no melatonin receptors, they had a deeper language. One of gods and ghosts, of spells and dreams, of breath and balance. Sleep was sacred. And when it was disrupted, all of life tilted. So they fought for peace, with oil, with prayer, with charms. Because a restful night wasn't just comfort, it was protection. From what lay beyond the eyelids, from what stirred in the still air, and from the darkness that listened, always just beyond the door. Beneath the grandeur of pyramids and the precision of hieroglyphs, Egypt's greatness was built by tired hands. Stone by stone, trench by trench, it was the workers, the masons, the quarrymen, the diggers, the haulers who carved history into the desert, and their sleep, it was brief, it was sacred, and it was often interrupted. This was the reality of shift sleep in ancient Egypt, a rhythm of exhaustion, snatched rest and shared spaces, dictated not by comfort but by duty. Let us walk into the workers' village of Deir el-Medina. Nestled near the Valley of the Kings, it was home to the artisans who built the tombs of pharaohs. The village wasn't lavish, but it was special, its people literate, paid, and protected. Even so, sleep came in snatches, dictated by labor shifts, seasonal changes, and temple schedules. Work on tombs often began before sunrise. To avoid the searing midday heat, workers were roused while stars still shimmered over the desert. A quick meal of bread and beer. A blessing muttered to Ptah god of craftsmen, and they were off through narrow desert paths to the cliffs where eternal kings were carved from rock. Their shifts were long but strategic. Workers often labored for 8 to 10 days straight, followed by 2 to 3 days of rest. These rest days were sacred, not just for recovery, but for rituals, family, and sleep. Deep sleep. Communal sleep. The kind that came after chiseling limestone for hours beneath a merciless sun. But during work weeks, sleep was fragmentary. The labor itself was divided, some in the tomb, some in supply lines, some preparing tools. Many had rotating night duties. Guards patrolled camps. Toolmakers shaped copper chisels by torchlight. Scribes recorded progress even as others slept. This created a cycle of shift sleep. You might sleep 3 hours before your night watch, or a stolen nap on a rolled cloak beneath scaffolding. Men learned to sleep anywhere against stone walls, beside half-finished murals or under makeshift awnings. In temporary camps near construction zones, sleep was tactical. Workers slept in group shelters, long huts of mud brick and reed roofing. Mats lined the floor. There was no real privacy. You curled up beside your neighbor, boots still on, dust in your ears, your pillow, a folded cloak, or a wooden headrest if you were lucky. Sleep was interrupted often. Tool mishaps, camel cries, priests calling from the hills, a sudden sandstorm, or the heat always the heat. In warmer months, men sweated even at midnight. In colder months, they huddled together, wrapped in linen like bundles of rope, using shared body heat to survive the night. There was no fixed bedtime. Night came when the task ended or when your limbs gave out. Some men slept with copper dust still clinging to their hands. Others whispered dreams aloud as they drifted off, sharing them with bunkmates who would nod, grunt, or offer quiet interpretations. On rest days, things changed. Workers returned home. To wives, to children, to rooms that smelled of incense and stew. Here, sleep became deeper. Full nights in familiar beds, mud brick platforms, softened with mats and old cloaks. Cats at their feet. The sound of wind rustling fig trees instead of chisels striking stone. These moments were precious. Fathers told stories. Children clung to them. Dreams were shared over morning bread. On these days, they could wake when the sun was already high, with no whip crack or temple bell to chase them from dreams. But even then, some workers couldn't sleep deeply. Why? Because their work followed them? The tombs they carved were for the dead? The gods they painted were powerful. Men dreamed of burial chambers, of jackals, of long corridors stretching into darkness. Some dreams were beautiful, some terrifying. Either way, they carried their labor into their sleep. Those who worked near temples had additional challenges. Religious festivals brought late-night rituals. Workers were called on to prepare torches, guard entrances, or even assist in sacrificial rites. The roar of chants, drums, and firelight meant sleep had to wait, again and yet. The Egyptians knew this wasn't healthy. Texts show concern for workers' well-being. Overseers allowed extra sleep when illnesses struck. Scribes noted rest days and even instances of lack of sleep as excuses for mistakes. The balance between duty and exhaustion was delicate. Some elite projects even had designated rest tents, shade-covered areas outside tomb sites where artisans could nap in short bursts. These were respected spaces, no loud talk. No disturbance. Sleep here wasn't laziness, it was preservation. And then there were the expeditions. Men sent into the desert for mining, quarrying, or scouting could go days without proper sleep. They walked with oxen caravans under a scorching sun, made camp in rock overhangs, and lay down on bare sand. A spear nearby, one eye open. They slept lightly and always in fear of scorpions, of bandits, of curses. Still, even in these moments, they whispered to the gods before closing their eyes. A line from the Book of the Dead, a personal prayer, a plea to return safely, to wake. Sleep was so scarce, so fragile, yet still protected. The state fed them, paid them, let them rest. Why? Because these were not ordinary workers, these men built eternity. Pharaohs trusted them to carve the gateway to the afterlife. So yes, they were tired, but their fatigue was woven into sacred stone. Their dreams sealed into sarcophagi. Their sleep, no matter how broken, was history in the making. They slept in shifts, they woke in shifts, but they dreamed as one. When the common people of Egypt laid down their heads, they looked to the stars and prayed for protection. But what of those who ruled beneath the stars? The pharaohs living gods on earth did not sleep like other men. Their nights were rituals. Their beds, sanctuaries, and their dreams, royal corridors to the divine. The sleep of a pharaoh was not simply rest, it was governance in silence. Let us enter the royal palace of Thebes or Memphis. As dusk settles over the horizon, cool shadows stretch across colonnaded courtyards. Incense curls from golden burners. Musicians quiet their lutes, and the king retires not to sleep as mortals do, but to commune with the gods. A pharaoh's bedchamber was a temple in miniature. The bed itself, elevated, carved of cedar or ebony, gilded in gold, adorned with sacred symbols, lotus blossoms for rebirth, ankhs for eternal life, cobras for protection. The frame often bore spells, etched carefully along the sides, invoking protection through the night. The bed stood atop lion-shaped legs or crocodile figures, meant to intimidate evil spirits who crept too close. Beneath the bed, amulets, figurines of base, a dagger of meteoric iron, perhaps just in case. The Egyptians left nothing to chance. The mattress was layered with woven fibers and topped with fine linen. Not merely clean, but ritually pure washed, scented, and woven by consecrated hands. Above the bed hung a canopy deep blue, painted with stars, a mimicry of Nut, goddess of the sky who swallowed Ra each night and birthed him each morning. Before sleeping, the pharaoh underwent a nightly rite. Servants anointed his feet with sacred oils, blue lotus, frankincense, myrrh. Priests recited hymns to soothe the divine body. A final offering was made to Ma'at, goddess of balance, to ensure harmony would rule even in dreams. Then silence. Only the gentle crackle of oil lamps remained. The pharaoh lay down not with exhaustion, but intent. His sleep was strategic. It was his audience with the gods. It was believed that during sleep, the pharaoh's ba, his soul bird, would rise and ascend to the heavens, where it would receive messages, visions, and instructions. The dreams of a king could become law. If the pharaoh dreamed of war, his armies might march. If he dreamed of floodwaters, canals would be ordered. A dream of famine might lead to increased grain reserves, and a dream of Osiris himself? That would mean monuments, perhaps a new temple, carved with symbols of resurrection. Scribes stood ready. Each morning, the high priest or royal interpreter would meet with the king. Dreams were discussed like matters of state. Notes were made, decisions drafted, all based on what had come to the pharaoh's sleeping mind. The chambers themselves were designed to protect the sanctity of this process. No noise, no light save one sacred lamp. No disturbance unless summoned. Royal guards posted outside were not merely human. They were trained in silence, alert to movement, but never intrusive. And not just anyone could serve the sleeping pharaoh. The attendants who helped him prepare for bed were trained in purification. They fasted, bathed, spoke only in whispers. It was said that an impure word in the pharaoh's presence could invite corruption into the dream space, that a single misspoken line might twist a prophecy or sour the soul's journey. Inside the king's bedchamber, symbols mattered. Paintings on the walls depicted the doeth the Egyptian underworld with safe passage routes and helpful gods. The headrest, shaped from alabaster or wood, bore inscriptions from the pyramid texts. The room faced east. Just as the soul departed westward at night, it returned with the sunrise. The windows, if there were any, were slits, angled precisely to catch the first golden ray of Ra. That beam was believed to awaken not just the king's body, but his soul refreshed, renewed, reborn. And if the pharaoh awoke with a troubled expression, this was no minor concern. The court would hush. Advisors would whisper, rituals might be hastily performed. Incense burned, offerings doubled. The wrong dream could indicate imbalance not just within the palace, but within the cosmos. For remember, the pharaoh was more than a ruler. He was the link between gods and people. His sleep was a sacred trust, and any tremor in that trust rippled outward. Even death could not sever this relationship. In burial, pharaohs were prepared as eternal dreamers. Their tombs were not crypts, but bedrooms complete with beds, headrests, statues of protective gods, food jars, oils, and even slippers, everything one might need for a long sleep, and an eventual awakening. In the tomb of Tutankhamun, 3 beds were found, one folded like a portable cot, one ceremonial with divine figures carved into the frame, and one practical, simple, sturdy, ready for use, as if the boy king might open his eyes at any moment and rise to greet the dawn. But the royal connection to sleep didn't stop at the pharaoh. Queens, too, had sacred rituals. Their beds, often smaller but equally adorned, were sanctuaries of divine femininity, perfumed rose oil, protective spells from Hathor, linen robes dyed in pomegranate. Their dreams were no less vital and sometimes even more prophetic, and the children of the palace, they were trained early, guided to speak of their dreams. Encouraged to sleep near amulets, their night terrors were examined as omens. A troubled prince's dream could call forth 3 priests and a palace-wide fast, because to sleep in royalty was not to close one's eyes, it was to open one's spirit. To dream was to rule. To rest was to connect, and to wake was to lead. The torches have dimmed, the servants have vanished. A hush blankets the palace like linen over a sleeping body. And in a quiet chamber of polished stone and flickering shadow, a boy prepares for sleep, though the weight of gods and kingdoms rests on his chest. He is Tutankhamun Pharaoh, barely a teenager, yet more than human. Crowned in gold, trained in divinity, cloaked in the burden of legacy. The priests call him Necher, Nefer, the good god. But tonight he is simply tired. The palace breathes around him. Distant footsteps fade. Lotus-scented air wafts through stone lattice. In the antechamber, a cat curls atop folded linen. All is calm. His sleeping quarters are precise in every detail. The walls bear sacred spells, painted in deep lapis and burnished ochre. Porous eyes gaze down from the corners. On one side, a mural of Re's solar bark crossing the sky. On the other, Anubis, guardian of the dead, depicted mid-step, ever watching. Tutankhamun stands barefoot before his bed. His servant approaches, a silent youth with coal-lined eyes, carrying a small ivory jar. It contains oil infused with myrrh and cedar. Gently, reverently, the servant rubs the oil into the pharaoh's feet, a ritual of purification. Not merely comfort, but spiritual cleansing. Nearby, the high priest whispers a final prayer. May the stars guide his Ka. May his bay find safe passage. May he walk in the dream field of Osiris and return. The bed itself is regal, but not ostentatious. Crafted from gilded wood and covered in fine white linen, it rests atop 4 carved lion paws. The headrest is curved ivory, etched with protective hieroglyphs. Beneath the frame, a dagger of meteoric iron gleams faintly in the half-light in insurance against the unseen. Tutankhamun lies back, arms crossed over his chest in a pose reminiscent of his future sarcophagus. But tonight, he is alive. His breath rises slow and steady, he gazes up. Above him, the canopy bears a painting of Nut, the sky goddess, her body arched across the heavens. She watches him with a mother's stillness. Outside, the Nile murmurs. A reed flute plays somewhere far off, its song drifting through the silence like smoke. Sleep comes slowly. The boy king has much on his mind. Even at this age, his days are filled with decisions, which god to honor, which advisors to trust, how to reclaim the balance left broken by his father's strange reforms. But the night does not care for politics. The night is ancient, and it calls him inward. His eyelids flutter, his breathing slows. And then he dreams, but this is no ordinary dream, not for a pharaoh. His soul, his Ba, lifts from his body like a bird of fire. It rises through the painted ceiling, through stone and sky, and enters the field of reeds, the divine plain between life and eternity. There, the air smells of saffron and wind. The ground blooms with lotus and grain. A boat waits on a mirror-still river. In it stands Thoth, god of wisdom, head of ibis, eyes like silver discs. You have questions, the god says. I am not ready, Tutankhamun replies. Not for death, not for kingship. You are already both, Thoth answers. But you are also something else, one who dreams with purpose. The dream shifts. Now the boy king is in a chamber without walls, its ceiling a constellation. Before him stands Osiris, green-skinned, majestic, silent. Behind him, the faces of ancestors, pharaohs of stone and legend, Amenhotep, Thutmose, Khufu, they say nothing, but their eyes burn into him like the midday sun. You carry the name of the gods, Osiris finally says. But do you carry their wisdom? Tutankhamun bows his head. I try. You must do more than try, Osiris replies. You must remember who you are and what your people need. Then, silence. He falls weightless through time. past temples, past chants, past incense smoke rising from unseen altars. When he wakes, the dream lingers like perfume. His chest feels light. His eyes blink slowly, adjusting to the soft light of dawn slipping past the window slits. Somewhere, a bird calls. The Nile stirs. He remembers everything. The priest enters, bowing low. "Did you sleep well, Majesty?" Tutankhamun does not answer immediately. He looks at his hands. The gold rings, the soft wrinkles on his fingertips from youthful palms. Then he nods. "Yes, I dreamed," the priest brightens. He will record it later. Perhaps share it with the temple scribes. Perhaps inscribe a portion in a private journal kept locked away in a chest beneath the temple stairs. The pharaoh rises. Attendants move quickly, but quietly. They wash him, anoint him, place the first collar around his neck. The palace comes to life. But for a moment, just a moment, the boy remains still. He glances once more at the bed, at the shadows of the gods painted on his walls, at the gleaming edge of the knife beneath the frame. He is not just king now. He is interpreter, dreamer, messenger. He does not know his reign will be short. He does not know that centuries from now, men in foreign clothes will unearth his body, still resting with the same care he practiced in life. That they will marvel at his bed, his linens, his golden mask. That his sleep will be interrupted not by spirits, but by cameras and lights and wonder. All he knows is this: last night he walked in the field of eternity, and the gods spoke. In ancient Egypt, the path to restful sleep did not begin in bed, it began with cleansing. To sleep with a clean body was not merely a matter of comfort, it was a spiritual necessity. One did not drift into the sacred realm of dreams while stained with the dust of the day. For the Egyptians, purity was power. It was protection. And the nightly hygiene rituals, however humble or elaborate, reflected this belief. Let us begin with the most basic act: washing. Before bed, Egyptians of nearly every class washed their hands and feet. The hands had labored, touched food, tools, people. The feet had walked through streets, dirt, and temple steps. To go to bed without rinsing them was considered not only unhygienic but impolite to the gods. In wealthier homes, bronze or ceramic wash basins were placed in sleeping chambers. Servants poured water infused with lotus or mint while the master scrubbed with a linen cloth. Some families used sand or natron and natural salt to exfoliate. This was not just cleansing. It was ritual. It marked the division between day and night. Poorer families shared a water jar or walked to communal basins in the courtyard. Even if the water was cool and the cloth rough, the ritual was the same. Dirt off, day gone. Soul clean. Then came the oils. Oils were not just for the rich. They were a cultural constant. Olive, castor, moringa, and sesame oils were infused with herbs and resins, used to soften skin and scent the body. Before sleep, many rubbed oil into their feet and temples. Some anointed their hair or what remained of it. In many households, shaving or keeping hair cropped short was part of a broader ritual of cleanliness, especially in warmer months when lice and sweat threatened sleep. Children were oiled too, especially to protect them from insects. Mothers might mix lavender or chamomile into the oil. A slick of it over the chest and feet helped lull restless bodies into sleep. And what of the mouth? Clean breath was tied to the sacred act of speech. The tongue gave praise to the gods. The mouth whispered dreams into the darkness. So many Egyptians chewed aromatic twigs, licorice root, cinnamon bark, or sweet reed to freshen their mouths before bed. In wealthier homes, rinsing the mouth with beer or water laced with herbs was common. Some priests even brushed with crushed pumice or salt paste. After all, how could one chant a midnight prayer with foul breath? Bedding, too, was part of hygiene. Linen sheets were washed regularly, especially in noble homes. The climate made this essential. Sweat, dust, oils all soaked easily into fabric. Priests, in particular, were obsessive about clean linens. Some changed bedding daily, believing that a ritually clean bed was the only place the gods would visit in dreams. Common folk aired out their mats during the day, beating them free of insects and dust. They'd sung them on rooftops, letting heat purify what water could not. It was said that even Ra himself smiled upon a clean sleeping mat, and there were perfumes. Egyptians loved fragrance. Before bed, many people dabbed their necks or chests with scented balm. Blue lotus, frankincense, kifi, a blend of 16 ingredients including wine and honey, were popular nighttime aromas. But the perfume wasn't for seduction, it was for the soul. A sweet scent was pleasing to the gods. It attracted protective spirits and lulled the Ka into peaceful wandering. Those who couldn't afford perfume sometimes crushed flowers into oil or burned dried petals in the room. Even the scent of bread, some said, was calming if mixed with honey and rubbed onto the palms. Hygiene was also visual. Some families decorated their sleeping chambers with symbols of cleanliness, painted lotus flowers, birds bathing in pools, or images of flowing water. These weren't just artistic flourishes, they were charms. They reminded the soul, even in sleep, of the virtues of purity. And then, the bugs. Despite their best efforts, the Egyptians shared their nights with mosquitoes, flies, fleas, and lice. Screens didn't exist, linen netting was rare, and the Nile, while life-giving, was also a breeding ground for insects. To fight this, many burned incense or dried herbs near their beds. Myrrh smoke, frankincense, tamarisk. The air would grow thick with scent, warding off pests and inviting rest. Some households even sprinkled crushed mint or camphor into corners, believing it deterred vermin. Cats helped too. Sacred and practical, they prowled the night, keeping rats and snakes at bay. A cat curled near your bed was not only a companion, it was your midnight guard. Still, bites happened. And when they did, ointments were ready, mixtures of honey and crushed herbs, mud packs. Oil and natron, anything to reduce itching and restore peace. Because once sleep was broken, the line between safety and danger blurred. A tired soul was vulnerable. A restless sleeper invited unwanted attention from both creatures and spirits. Even dreams could reflect hygiene. A dream of filth, foul water, or unwashed clothes was interpreted as a warning, a message to cleanse, to realign, to start again. And so, when sleep was troubled, people often responded with more than prayers. They bathed, they laundered, they burned new incense. A clean space meant a clean mind. Priests emphasized this in temple life. Before entering sacred spaces, even in dreams, the body had to be ritually pure. And since dreams were believed to bring one into the presence of gods, hygiene before sleep was non-negotiable. It was, in every sense, spiritual armor. So whether a royal being anointed by moonlight or a farmer washing his cracked feet by firelight, every Egyptian understood to sleep unwashed was to invite chaos. To sleep clean was to walk confidently into the night. Sleep in ancient Egypt was never silent. Though the sun had set behind the desert cliffs and the last golden glimmer of Ra had disappeared, the world did not go quiet. It transformed. The heat lifted, the shadows grew long, and the land took on a different rhythm. A rhythm not of labor, but of life continuing through whispers, chirps, footfalls, chants, and dreams. The night in ancient Egypt was alive with sound. In the countryside, where most Egyptians lived, crickets took up their posts the moment the air cooled. Their raspy symphony echoed through the tall grasses of the Nile banks, a background hum that accompanied millions to sleep. Nearby, frogs croaked from irrigation canals, their voices rhythmic and deep. They were sacred creatures, symbols of rebirth and fertility, but to the villagers trying to rest, they were simply ever-present companions, night singers from muddy stages. Sometimes you might hear the brush of papyrus reeds swaying with the night breeze, or the slap of water against the sides of moored boats. Fishermen, returning late, might call out in low voices. Oars dipped softly in water. Ropes creaked as sails were tied off for the night. In towns, the atmosphere was denser. The warmth of the day lingered in the stone. People lingered too. Even after dark, there were footsteps in the alleys, vendors packing up, priests finishing evening rituals, the clatter of clay jugs, a mother humming as she rocked a child, a man whispering to his gods from a shaded doorway. Not all voices were human. Jackals cried in the distance, sharp, eerie howls from the edge of the desert. They prowled tomb entrances and cemeteries, sacred to Anubis, god of embalming. Their cries were believed to be messages from the spirit world or, at the very least, reminders of it. Dogs barked in response. Domestic, alert, loud. Occasionally, a donkey brayed so suddenly that sleeping children awoke with a start, then silence again. Then the soft rustle of someone returning to sleep. In the cities, the sounds came layered. From palace complexes, you might hear sandals tapping on marble, distant harp music, the soft knock of doors as night attendants moved quietly. In noble houses, the snort of horses, the buzz of oil lamps, servants whispering as they prepared chambers for sleep. Even temples, those solemn homes of gods, were not hushed after dark. Some priests kept vigil all night. Their footsteps echoed in hypostyle halls as they refreshed incense, sang hymns, or tended sacred fires. The beating of sistrums rattling musical instruments might ring out once, then fade. Each sound had meaning. To the ancient Egyptian, night was not merely absence, it was a canvas. Sounds painted over silence, some were reassuring, some were warnings. All were listened to with reverence. Consider the Nile herself, she whispered constantly, the slow push of water against riverbanks, the chirp of insects that clung to her reeds, occasionally the splash of a crocodile slipping into her depths. No one feared the Nile's voice, it was the breath of life, but it was never ignored. Atop homes, many Egyptians slept on rooftops. There the sounds were clearer, amplified by height and open air. Overhead, bats flitted and clicked. Birds, especially the sacred ibis, cried out suddenly before settling again. In the silence, you could hear your own breath, your child murmuring in sleep, the hiss of sand brushing against plaster, and above it all the night sky. The stars didn't speak, but they pulsed with presence. Many Egyptians believed they were watching, listening, that the stars themselves were the souls of the dead or guardians of the world. People spoke to them quietly. A mother might say, "Watch over my boy." A merchant might mutter, "Grant me peace." These weren't prayers in the formal sense, just words released upward, carried on soundless winds. Inside sleeping rooms, the noise was more intimate. The creak of wooden beds, the rustle of linen as someone shifted, a cat purring at the foot of a mat, the drip of condensation from a water jar, someone coughing softly into the dark. Insects sometimes buzzed close to the ear, flies that had escaped the evening smoke coils, fleas that stirred in woven mats, the slapping of hands trying to quiet them, and always someone snoring, loudly, comically, the first sleep soundtrack in every household. In the workers' villages, night meant shared quarters. 10 people in a room meant 10 different noises, breathing, muttering, scratching, turning, a child dreaming out loud, a husband whispering something only his wife would hear. Yet even with the noise, sleep came, the body was tired. The mind accepted the song of the night. And sometimes it wasn't noise that broke sleep, but silence. Too much silence was unnatural, ominous. If the frogs stopped croaking, if the jackals stopped howling, if the river stopped whispering, then something was wrong. A spirit nearby? A death approaching? A storm about to strike? Egyptians had an ear for the natural rhythm of nighttime sound. When it broke, they woke and listened and waited to help soothe the nerves some burned tamarisk wood. Others hummed songs. A grandmother might murmur a spell she learned as a girl. A scribe might recite poetry by heart. Anything to restore the pattern, because sleep needed a rhythm, not silence, not chaos, but rhythm, a lull of frogs, a gust through reeds, a breath beside you, a whisper of gods. This was the soundscape of Egyptian sleep. No white noise machines, no silence chambers. Just the natural orchestra of a living world at rest but never truly asleep. In ancient Egypt, sleep was never taken lightly. It was a vulnerable state of sacred passage into unknown realms where the soul wandered and the body lay defenseless. And so, the Egyptians, masters of ritual and guardians of the unseen, never closed their eyes without protection. To sleep in Egypt was to fortify yourself against evil spirits, against wandering souls, against dreams that came too close to the world of the dead. Protection was not just spiritual, it was architectural, physical, and deeply personal. start with the most iconic figure of nighttime defense. Base, short, stocky, wild-haired, and lion-faced. Base was the god of the household, childbirth, and most importantly, sleep. He was ugly by design. His terrifying grin and bulging eyes weren't mistakes. They were weapons meant to scare away anything that lurked in the shadows. His figure was everywhere, carved onto bedposts, painted on bedroom walls, etched into headrests. Families placed small base figurines beneath sleeping mats or hung them from rafters above. Children clutched amulets shaped in his likeness. And when someone had a nightmare, they were told, "Base must have stepped away, let's call him back." Closely tied to Base was Torit, the protective goddess of motherhood. With the head of a hippopotamus, the back of a crocodile, and the limbs of a lion, she stood as a fearsome guardian. Her images were kept near beds, especially for pregnant women and children. To see her carved above a door or painted in a room was to know that evil spirits would think twice before entering. But protection extended beyond the gods. Amulets were vital. Crafted from faience, stone, metal, or clay, amulets were worn, carried, or placed near the sleeper. Some were shaped like the Eye of Horus, offering clarity and defense against the unseen. Others resembled scarabs, representing rebirth and protection from the dangers of the underworld. One popular choice, the SA symbol, a looped charm resembling a life preserver. It symbolized protection and was frequently tied to beds or incorporated into jewelry worn at night. Parents tied amulets around the necks or wrists of children. They believed that just as a parent kept watch during the day, these symbols kept watch at night. And what of the sleeping space itself? Bedrooms, especially among the wealthy, were designed with spiritual safety in mind. Walls were painted with images of protective deities. Doorways bore inscriptions. Some even had false doors, allowing the cot to exit and re-enter peacefully without letting other spirits through. People slept with heads elevated not only for comfort, but to keep the face and breath away from ground-level demons. The headrest, usually made of wood or ivory, often bore magical inscriptions. It wasn't a soft pillow, but a spiritual anchor. Some families drew simple protective symbols near their beds. A cross of water lines, a line of crushed salt, a smear of ochre on the threshold. These were spells in visual form, silent, powerful, and intended to confuse or repel the uninvited. The smell of the room mattered too. Protection came in the form of smoke and scent. At nightfall, families burned incense, often frankincense, myrrh, or tamarisk. The air grew thick, fragrant, and sacred. Smoke was believed to confuse malevolent spirits, making it harder for them to find sleepers. In times of fear or after a bad dream, special blends were burned. The smoke served as a signal to the gods and a warning to anything dark. This house is guarded. Prayers were spoken softly at bedtime. Not the grand chants of temples, but personal phrases passed through generations. A mother might whisper, "Guard his breath, hold her dreams, keep the gate closed." Or an elder might recite lines from the Book of the Dead, words meant to guide the soul safely through the dream realm and back again. And if a dream was especially disturbing, the household took action. Water was sprinkled around the mat. Amulets were rearranged. In extreme cases, a ritual washing was performed. The sleeper bathed in a mix of water, herbs, and salt believed to cleanse both body and soul. Even animals played a role. Cats, sacred to the goddess Bastet, were not only adored, they were defenders. A cat sleeping at the foot of your bed was more than warmth. It was protection. Their watchful eyes, even in sleep, were said to repel invisible intruders. Dogs, too, were valued guardians, often tied near doorways or brought into rooms after unsettling dreams. Their barks were believed to scatter spirits. In some households, mirrors were placed beside beds. These weren't vanity items. Mirrors, in the Egyptian worldview, reflected more than appearances, they deflected harm. A spirit that saw its own reflection might flee, confused or ashamed. But the most important form of protection? A known name. Egyptians believed that to speak one's name aloud before sleep was to affirm identity, anchoring the soul. The name was power. To forget it was to risk being lost in the dream, realm or beyond. So each night, families said their names. Out loud, sometimes whispered. Sometimes chanted, as if to say, This is who I am. I belong here, I will return. Because for all the beauty of the night, it was still the domain of the unknown. The gods traveled it. So did spirits. And while sleep could be a source of wisdom, it could also open the door to chaos. So they closed their eyes, but only after preparing, only after protecting, only after arming themselves with symbols, scents, and sacred words. Because to sleep in ancient Egypt was to surrender and to guard the soul as it journeyed far beyond the body. What if there were no clocks to tell the time? How would we know when to go to bed? Would we still sleep 8 hours a night? Turns out our ancestors didn't need clocks. They read the sky. And even without clocks, they understood the science of good rest. Welcome to my channel. 1,000 years before the Great Pyramids were built, the pharaohs who ruled Egypt ushered in an era of prosperity and stability. In this fertile land where the sun's journey across the sky determined the seasons and the Nile's floods defined the years. Time was not measured by clocks, but by shadows, harvests, and the position of stars. The Egyptians knew the earth rests differently in summer than it does in winter, so too must we. Their calendars were precise. They marked 3 main seasons, Akhet, Pare, and Shemu. These weren't just agricultural terms. They dictated the very cadence of daily life, including when, where, and how people slept. Akhet, the flood season, mid-July to mid-November. During Akhet, the Nile swelled. Fields disappeared under water and farming halted. But the flood was a gift, not a disaster. It nourished the land for the coming year. Work slowed during these months. Farmers turned to maintenance, pottery, weaving, or labor on state projects like temples and tombs. For many, this was the season of longest sleep. Cooler wines from the river meant more comfortable nights. No urgent dawn harvests. No scorching sun demanding pre-dawn activity. People slept in longer cycles. Entire families stayed indoors after dusk, protected from mosquitoes and spirits drawn by the floodwaters. Houses were damp but restful. The murmur of nearby water, frogs croaking, the rhythmic swish of reeds. It was the lullaby of Akhet. Some even slept to the sound of boats drifting silently past, sails slack in the moonlight. Pare, the growing season, mid-November to mid-March. As the waters receded and crops began to sprout, Egypt emerged from rest into renewal. Pare was a time of planting, planning, and effort. It was also cooler, especially at night. Sleep became layered. People now wrapped themselves tightly in linen or animal skins. Mats were lifted off the floor to avoid the chill that crept up through clay and stone. Fires burned in the corners of homes, casting flickering shadows and radiating warmth for those curled nearby. In northern Egypt, particularly during the coldest weeks, sleep became intermittent. Families would wake in the middle of the night to stoke fires or shift positions. Parents rubbed children's feet with warmed oil before sleep. Elders, especially sensitive to the cold, often napped during the warmer parts of the day and bundled tightly at night. For the poor, rooftops were abandoned. Sleep moved indoors. Smoke from hearths flavored dreams. Priests even altered rituals for the colder season. Baths were taken before dusk, and special incense was burned to promote warm, peaceful rest. Shemu, the harvest season, mid-March to mid-July, the busiest time of the year. Shemu brought the harvest, and with it urgency. Men and women rose before the sun, long before the air grew hot. Their days were packed with cutting grain, carrying baskets, processing food, and offering thanks to Renenutet, the goddess of nourishment. Sleep was shortest during Shemu, but it was deep, earned, revered. Workers often returned home with aching limbs and sunburnt skin, too tired to speak. Meals were simple lentils, bread, beer, and then collapse. Not into beds, but onto mats, courtyards, rooftops. Any surface would do. Siestas were born here. The midday sun scorched with ferocity. Labor paused. Men and women retreated indoors or under trees, found shade, and napped. These brief spells of daytime sleep restored strength for afternoon tasks. In wealthier homes, shaded upper rooms became seasonal bedrooms. Cool stone, high walls, gentle breezes. Some even had servants fan the sleepers with palm leaves soaked in perfumed water. In rural areas, children napped under awnings made from linen sheets soaked in water in ancient attempt at evaporative cooling, the summer heat adapting to extremes. In the height of Shimu, when temperatures soared, sleep patterns fragmented. People slept in shifts a few hours before dawn, a nap after midday, another rest after sunset. The goal wasn't continuous sleep, but rest when rest was possible. Houses were adjusted for the heat. Windows stayed open, draped with light linen to keep out insects. Roofs became crowded sleeping grounds. Entire families, even neighbors, sometimes slept under the stars' bodies lined up like reeds along the Nile. Fires were extinguished. Lanterns doused early. The night belonged to coolness. Oils were thinned with water. Headrests were soaked before use. Some slept with damp cloths across their foreheads. Even cats refused to sleep indoors, curling instead on cool tiles or shaded alleys. Children adapted best. They fell asleep in corners, in laps, in baskets. Their flexibility was legendary, timing in circadian cycles. Without clocks, how did the Egyptians know when to sleep? The stars told them. Certain constellations, like Sopdet, were watched closely. When it appeared just before dawn, it marked not only the new year, but the ideal time to rise. Scribes and temple priests used star clocks charts painted on tomb ceilings to mark hours of the night. These helped structure rituals, but also gave guidance to regular people, when to lie down, when to rise, when to offer prayers. And so the heavens dictated the rhythm: longer sleep in cool seasons, shift sleep in heat, naps when needed. But always balance, festivals, and disrupted rest. There were exceptions. During festivals, sleep became a luxury. Torches lit the night. Streets echoed with music and chants. Processions paraded under moonlight. In Thebes, during the Opet festival, sleep was nearly impossible. For days, people feasted, drank, danced. Pilgrims from far regions arrived and camped near temples. They slept in shifts or not at all. When they finally lay down, it was on sand, stone, or a stranger's rooftop, but no one minded. They believed, after celebration, sleep would come like a blessing, and it always did. The eternal cycle in Egypt, sleep was never fixed. It was fluid, seasonal, sacred, the rhythm of Ra's journey across the sky, the flooding of the Nile, the warmth of the stone beneath you, the breeze from a palm, the flicker of firelight, the pattern of a god's shadow on your wall. Sleep changed with it all, and the people adapted not with resistance, but with grace, because for the Egyptians, time did not dictate life. The land did, the river did, the sky did, and through it all they slept. When it comes to rest, some things never change. We all want to be comfortable. We all get hotter or colder depending on the season, and we all have our own unique way of finding sleep. It seems that no matter where we are or when, the quest for a good night's sleep is universal. When you close your eyes at night, do you turn to your side, stretch on your back, curl into yourself like a resting cat? You might think this is a matter of comfort, but in ancient Egypt, how you slept wasn't just physical, it was spiritual, symbolic, and occasionally even strategic. Sleeping posture in Egypt was influenced by health, heat, belief, and death. Yes, even death. Because to the Egyptians, lying down was never neutral, it reflected how you lived and how you hoped to return. Sleep position in the home for ordinary Egyptians, sleep posture was mostly practical. The poor slept on mats or rid floors with little or no cushioning. Side sleeping was most common, curled slightly, often with knees bent toward the chest. This fetal position wasn't just comfortable on a hard surface, it also symbolized safety and rebirth. Just as the sun was reborn each day, the curled body echoed the curve of the womb and the crescent of the moon. Children often slept pressed against siblings or parents, their positions shifting throughout the night, arms thrown across others, feet tucked beneath cloth. Back sleeping was rarer. Why? Because lying flat with arms at your side too closely resembled the position of a corpse. It was, in many minds, an invitation to the gods to mistake you for someone ready to leave the living world. Some avoided it altogether, especially during periods of mourning or sickness. Better to curl, to show vitality, to hold the breath close, headrests and neck alignment. One of the most defining aspects of Egyptian sleep was the use of a headrest, a curved wooden, ivory, or stone piece designed to support the neck rather than the head. This sleeping tool subtly shaped posture. It encouraged sleeping on the back or slightly turned to the side, keeping the head elevated above the floor. The purpose wasn't just comfort, it was protection. Egyptians believed that evil spirits crept along the ground at night. Lifting the head above that zone offered spiritual safety and preserved the sleeper's life force. The curved design also allowed air to circulate beneath the neck in hot weather, a practical cooling feature in a land where summer nights stayed warm long after sunset. Some inscriptions even suggest the head must remain elevated to ensure dreams flow properly unobstructed, clear, and upright. Textual clues and depictions, though no ancient Egyptian sleep manual survives, we do have Art and Art Speaks volumes. Tomb scenes, reliefs, and funerary stelae sometimes depict the deceased lying in what we recognize as a rest pose. On their side, one arm bent under the head, the other draped across the torso. This wasn't just decoration, it was aspiration. The dead were shown sleeping, eternally in peace and protection. In elite tombs, painted figures often recline on raised beds, one leg bent, the other extended. This was thought to represent openness and readiness for transition, not just into sleep, but into the afterlife. Some images show priests or gods attending a sleeper, indicating the sacredness of their resting form. And in love poetry from the period, there are references to couples laying side by side, thigh touching thigh, breathing as one. Intimacy-shaped posture. Warmth drew bodies close. Even how lovers slept was worth recording. Sleeping upright? In rare instances, certain priests or temple initiates may have slept sitting or reclining in a semi-upright position. This wasn't for comfort, it was part of ritual discipline. To remain alert, even while resting. To practice control of the body and consciousness. Some believe that sleeping too deeply might leave the soul too exposed. So sleep came in shallow layers, never fully surrendering. This type of posture was sometimes practiced in temple sanctuaries or sacred spaces. It echoed the stillness of statues' divine forms who never slept but always watched. Sleeping with the wind, in many regions of Egypt, wind direction influenced sleep position. On hot nights, people aligned themselves to catch the breeze. Most homes were built to harness the north-south airflow from desert winds. Those who slept on rooftops turned their bodies toward the cooler air, sometimes shifting several times through the night. Sleep posture wasn't fixed, it was adaptive. You curled to preserve heat, stretched to release it, tucked into shadows or shifted toward moonlight, moved closer to a companion or away, depending on the season. Animals and sleep habits, pets, especially cats, affected posture too. A cat curled up beside the knees, you stayed still. A dog sprawled across the mat, you adjusted around it. Even sacred animals, ibis, monkeys, or falcons kept in noble homes often had sleeping spaces near their owners. Their presence changed the shape of the night. Some believe sleeping with your right side exposed was auspicious, inviting Ra-S energy as he rose in the east. Others believe turning left toward the setting sun brought peace from Osiris, lord of the afterlife. Either way, direction mattered. Sleep imitates death. The strongest symbolic posture was the corpse pose, lying flat on the back, hands crossed over the chest. This was not how most Egyptians chose to sleep in life, but in death it became universal. Pharaohs, nobles, workers all were buried this way, as though beginning an eternal slumber from which they hoped to awaken again. The position was spiritual alignment, body at rest, soul in transit, and it inspired fear in the living. Many avoided this pose unless sick, dying, or extremely devout. To lie too still, too flat, was to risk tempting the gods into thinking your time had come. Posture as prayer. Ultimately, sleep posture in Egypt was more than comfort, it was communication. The body spoke in its shape, curled in a ball, seeking safety, facing east, calling to Ra, facing west, inviting dreams from the ancestors, sleeping alone, spine straight, prepared for visions, sleeping in a tangle of limbs, trusting the warmth of life. Even in unconsciousness, the body carried meaning, and the Egyptians, masters of symbolic life, understood this better than most. They knew that how you rested shaped how you dreamed and how you would be remembered. To sleep in ancient Egypt was not always a solitary affair. Sometimes nestled beside your feet, curled into your side, or stretched across your mat like royalty, there was another presence, warm, watchful, and purring. Animals were not just companions in ancient Egypt. They were protectors, spiritual allies, family, and in many homes, they shared the bed. The sacred cat, no animal, was more beloved in Egyptian households than the cat. More than a pet, the cat was divine. It was the living embodiment of Bastet, the goddess of home, protection, fertility, and joy. And where Bastet watched, evil spirits dared not enter. Cats slept alongside adults, children, and even priests. In wealthier homes, cats were pampered fed fish, adorned with jewelry, and sometimes even mummified when they died. But even in modest houses, they curled on mats or at the edges of shared sleeping spaces. People believed that a cat's presence in bed kept nightmares away. Its sensitivity to unseen forces, its nocturnal vigilance, its ability to slip through shadows all made it an ideal guardian of the night. If a child had a night terror, a cat might be moved closer to them the following night. It was thought that cats could see what we cannot and silently keep threats at bay. Cats also offered warmth. In winter, multiple family members might sleep near a cat just for its body heat. And of course, the rhythmic sound of purring was a natural lullaby. Dogs by the door, or on the mat, dogs too, were valued sleepers, especially as guards. Associated with Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming and the afterlife, dogs were seen as guides between worlds. Though they didn't enjoy quite the same sacred status as cats, dogs were fiercely loyal and slept wherever their humans did. In rural homes, dogs often lay near the threshold guarding the sleeping space. But if the dog was a favorite or especially attached to a child, it might sleep on the mat itself. Some slept at the foot of the bed. Others curled beside a sleeping child. If you had a large enough home, you might even assign a dog its own resting space in the same room. And like cats, dogs were believed to warn of spirits. A growl in the night, a bark into empty space, that was not ignored. It might mean a wandering soul or a hungry jackal too close to the house. Monkeys, falcons, and the exotic sleeper. In noble households, pets could be more unusual. Monkeys, kept as entertainers and companions, often slept indoors. Some were small enough to sit on a shoulder by day and curl up on a cushion by night. Affectionate and mischievous, they were beloved by children and sometimes permitted into sleeping chambers. Their quick movements and sharp senses made them valued early alarms. If a monkey shrieked in the dark, everyone woke. Falcons and hawks sacred to Horus, god of the sky, were also kept, though not typically in beds. Still, in some priestly residences, young birds were housed in sleeping areas during festival seasons, believed to bring blessings. Their presence, especially during sacred nights, was thought to bind the household to the heavens. Tortoises and beetles, yes, even smaller creatures, had their place. Tortoises, symbols of longevity, were kept in courtyards and sometimes allowed inside during cooler months. They wouldn't share a bed, but their slow, calm presence near the sleeping area was thought to draw peace. Scarab beetles, symbols of rebirth and transformation, weren't tea pets in the modern sense, but tiny sculptures of them were kept on knit stands or tucked under mats. While not living bed companions, they symbolically slept beside their owners, offering spiritual renewal. Bedtime with beast beds, even simple ones, were adapted to accommodate animals. A thick mat was often placed at the foot of the bed for a cat or a small dog. Linen covers were shared, not just between people but with pets. In wealthier homes, miniature cushions or platforms were sometimes made for animals. These weren't decorative, they were offerings of comfort to beings that comforted you in return. Some nobles even commissioned amulets for their pets, tied around the neck or hung above their sleeping space. These charms invoked protection not just for humans, but for the animals themselves, acknowledging their role in defending the home. The spiritual dimension. The presence of animals in the bed wasn't just about companionship. It was part of Egypt's broader spiritual worldview. Animals were channels, believed to perceive the divine, the dangerous, and the invisible. A cat suddenly leaving the bed could be a sign. A dog howling at the wall could indicate a restless spirit. A monkey refusing to settle might warn of imbalance in the house and in dreams. Some Egyptians reported dreaming through their animals, seeing the world through a cat's eyes, running across desert sands as a dog, flying as a hawk. These weren't hallucinations. They were considered sacred visions, clues about the soul's journey. The Book of the Dead contains references to transformation into animals, especially birds and cats. To share sleep with such creatures was to invite their qualities: grace, protection, intuition. Children and animal sleep children especially benefited from sleeping with animals. A child sleeping with a cat beside them was believed to be shielded from night terrors. If a child was sick, a pet sleeping beside them was seen as a comfort, not just for the body, but the soul. In poorer homes, even a goat or sheep might share the indoor sleeping space. These weren't just livestock. They were part of the household, trusted companions, warm bodies against cold nights. Children who slept near animals were said to grow strong, steady, and courageous. Farewell to companions. When a beloved pet died, mourning followed. Cats were mummified and buried with care. Dogs received funerary inscriptions. Some were buried near their owner's tomb or home, their names etched into clay. A few were even buried with their owners, believed to guard them in the afterlife as they had in life. Some tomb art shows pharaohs and nobles lying in eternal rest with pets curled at their feet, an acknowledgement that even in eternity they would not sleep alone. A night shared. To share your sleep with a creature was an act of trust. The Egyptians understood that animals offered more than company. They gave warmth, warning, and wisdom. They stood between the sleeper and the unknown. And so, night after night, ancient Egyptians did not simply lie beside their pets. They invited guardians into their rest, and in return they slept more soundly, more safely, more sacredly. The night settles over Egypt like soft linen. The sky blushes purple, the heat fades, lamps flicker. And somewhere, beneath a reed roof or a stone ceiling, a gentle melody stirs, a lullaby. Not shouted, not sung with grandeur, but whispered low and slow, like the Nile herself. In ancient Egypt, sleep was often ushered in by song. Music was not just entertainment. It was magic, medicine, memory. And at bedtime, it became a bridge between worlds. Music in daily life music was woven into every corner of Egyptian life, from harvest chants in the fields to hymns in the temples. And when the day ended, music did not vanish. It changed shape. In the home, instruments were put away. Voices softened. The frantic rhythms of work gave way to something gentler. A mother's hum, a grandmother's chant, a lover's melody whispered into the ear of someone already drifting into dreams. Lullabies of the common home in modest households, lullabies were as essential as blankets. Mothers cradled infants and sang in old dialects. The lyrics were simple, passed down orally, never written. A few common phrases appear in letters and ostraka. Sleep now. Lotus child, Ra watches you from the west. Close your eyes. The moon has kissed the palm trees. Drift away, my little falcon. Tomorrow is waiting. These songs were not poetic performances. They were spoken warmth, tied to rhythm and breath. A soothing cadence. A lullaby was often little more than a chant repeated again and again, but repetition brought calm. Familiarity brought safety. Children knew the tunes before they knew words. Instruments of night music wasn't always a cappella. In wealthier homes, or those with musically skilled family members, simple instruments accompanied bedtime. Sistrum, a handheld rattle sacred to Hathor. It made a soft, metallic jingling sound, perfect for rhythmic shaking. Lute or lyre, small wooden-stringed instruments plucked gently to create calming tones. End-blown flutes, made from reeds, their breathy tones mimicked the night breeze. Fathers might strum a few notes on a lyre. A sister might shake a sistrum in gentle pulses. Sometimes two voices harmonized in the dark, one adult, one child singing about the stars, the Nile, or dreams. These sounds soothed the household. Even neighbors might hear and feel the weight of their own eyelids grow heavy. Hymns as lullabies in religious households or among temple staff. Bedtime might include sacred hymns. These were often spoken as prayers, but structured with rhythm and melody. Some popular nighttime hymns included lines to Ra, Return, great light, when morning comes. Until then, warm our sleep with your memory. Nut, stretch your arms above us, Sky Mother, and cradle us in your starry skin. Bass, shake your rattle, great protector, and frighten the evil that hunts the dark. Such hymns blurred the line between song and spell. They invoked gods, calmed children, and aligned the sleeper's spirit with the divine. A priest might chant slowly in the next room. A grandmother might adapt the same lines for her grandson's lullaby, replacing divine names with personal ones. Protect my baby as you would your son. Music personalized the sacred. Though we can't hear them now, the lullabies of ancient Egypt still exist in fragments, rhythms, and memory. They live in the lines of ancient poetry, in the shape of instruments found in tombs, in the images of mothers cradling children beneath crescent moons, in the hush of temples where sound was sacred, and in the universal truth that music makes sleep softer. Whether in reed hut or royal palace, song drifted through Egyptian nights. It danced with shadows, it kissed eyelids, it cradled the soul, and it reminded every sleeper child, elder, farmer, king that even in darkness they were held. When we sleep, our brains cycle through multiple phases, shifting from light slumber to deep rest. Our eyes flutter behind our eyelids, our breathing slows, and our brains, once buzzing with activity, start producing slow, rhythmic waves. This deep sleep is essential for restoring our minds and bodies. But what if it's more than restoration? What if it's also communication? The ancient Egyptians didn't just sleep. They conversed with the divine. They believed that when their eyes closed and their bodies slipped into stillness, their Ba, the soul, rose from the chest like a bird and flew into another realm. There, among the stars and spirits, it encountered symbols, shadows, gods, and messages. Dreams were not entertainment. They were omens. They were warnings, blessings, and sometimes instructions. To dream was to speak with the divine, and wise Egyptians listened. To understand their dreams, we must first understand their world. Ancient Egypt was a land of farmers and pharaohs, of priests and pyramids, where the Nile's yearly floods dictated life and death. Every aspect of their existence was imbued with meaning. Their gods were many, their rituals complex, and their belief in the afterlife unshakable. In this world, death was not the end, but a transition. And the journey began with a single step, a single breath, a single dream. For the Egyptians believed that every dream was a message from the gods, a sign, a symbol, a prophecy. And they kept records of these messages, recording them on papyrus, clay tablets, or stone. We know the Egyptians took dreams seriously because they wrote them down. One of the most fascinating discoveries from Deir el-Medina, the village of royal tomb workers, is the Ramesside Dream Book, a list of over 200 dream interpretations recorded on papyrus. It reads like a cosmic user manual. If a man dreams he is eating crocodile flesh, good, he will gain power over his enemies. If a man dreams of looking into a deep well, bad, it foretells death. If a man dreams of receiving a loaf of bread from a god, very good, his prayers have been heard. Dreams were coded messages, and the Egyptians had decoders. Priests trained in dream interpretation, Remet offered their services. Wealthy families would describe a troubling dream to a temple scribe and receive a reading. The message might comfort or terrify, but either way, it could not be ignored. Their dream motifs were rich and varied, reflecting the complexities of their beliefs. Snakes, for instance, usually symbolized danger or betrayal. Cats represented protection or a sign of the goddess Bastet. Flooded fields could mean wealth or chaos, depending on the dream's tone. Flying signified the soul rising successfully and was often a sign of good health. Losing teeth, however, was a harbinger of death or illness. Being embraced by a god was a blessing, while being chased suggested spiritual unrest or a guilty conscience. These symbols, appearing across regions and classes, from royal scribes to farmers, formed a universal language of the subconscious. The Egyptians approached dreams from all angles, seeking understanding, guidance, and comfort. They visited temples, consulted priests, and slept in sacred spaces, hoping for divine messages. In their quest, they built temples of incubation, places dedicated to receiving dreams. Here, People would sleep in sacred chambers, hoping to receive a direct dream from a god. The process was elaborate. It included fasting or ritual purification before entering, offerings of wine, flowers, and incense, chanting or prayer to request a vision, sleeping on a specially prepared bed under divine symbols, waking at dawn and reporting the dream to a priest for interpretation. Temples of Serapis, Imhotep, and Thoth were especially famous for healing dreams. Some came seeking cures for illness. Others came looking for signs about marriage, fertility, or the future. These were not casual naps. They were pilgrimages of the soul, but not all dreams were gentle. Nightmares were feared, believed to be attacks from spirits, curses, or divine anger. If a person dreamt of being dragged, drowned, burned, or buried alive, it was seen as a serious warning. Often they would burn herbs the next night to cleanse the bed, consult a priest to perform a protective spell, offer food or wine to the dead. Sometimes the dreamer's own ancestors were angry or sleep in a different direction. Changing orientation was thought to confuse evil spirits. Children with recurring nightmares were given protective charms to hold at night. A cat might be placed near the bed. The name of a helpful deity, like Base, would be painted on the door. Even dreams needed guards. Among the most compelling types of dreams were those involving the dead. These weren't considered hallucinations. If your grandmother appeared in your dream, it meant that she had something to say. Sometimes the dead returned with advice. Change your ways. You forgot my offering. Your brother is lying to you. Sometimes they came with comfort, visiting a child after a funeral or appearing healthy and happy, but occasionally they brought trouble. A restless ancestor might appear with red eyes or torn clothing, signs that they were unhappy in the afterlife. In such cases, the living responded by restoring their grave or tomb, making fresh offerings, dedicating a prayer or hymn in their honor. To be visited by the dead in a dream meant that the barrier between worlds had thinned and you were now involved. So, the next time you drift off to sleep, remember you are part of a grand continuum, a lineage of dreamers stretching back millennia. Your dreams may not hold prophetic messages from gods, but they are still yours to discover. You are still conversing with something vast and eternal. And when you wake, if you listen carefully, you might just hear the echoes of those conversations. To the ancient Egyptians, gods did not merely rule from afar. They walked among mortals, accepted offerings, and like humans, they rested. But divine rest was not like ours. It was sacred, symbolic, laced with magic. The beds of the gods weren't just furniture. They were altars, they were portals. They were cosmic stages where the drama of rebirth played again and again. And just as mortals slept for strength and dreams, the gods reclined to enact creation, resurrection, and eternal order. The sun god's slumber at the heart of all Egyptian time was Ra, the sun god. His journey across the sky was daily life. But at night, Ra did not simply disappear. He slept, or more precisely, he sailed through the underworld, the duet on his solar bark. There, he encountered chaos, evil, and darkness. Each hour of the night, Ra battled serpents and shadows. And each morning, he rose again, victorious. Temples sometimes depicted Ra reclining on sacred beds between battles. These weren't naps, they were metaphors. His rest was the moment between life and renewal. The world paused while the sun god lay still, and everything depended on him waking. Osiris, lord of the sleeping dead, no god is more connected to sacred sleep than Osiris, ruler of the afterlife. Osiris did not simply die, he was laid upon a divine bed. A bier, shaped like a lion or adorned with symbols of rebirth, where his body was wrapped, mourned, and resurrected. In rituals, priests reenacted this sacred sleep. They placed statues of Osiris on ceremonial beds during festivals, surrounded by incense, myrrh, and chants. These beds weren't just symbols of death, they were platforms of transformation. To lie on Osiris's bed was to become eternal. In fact, many funerary beds and tombs mimic Osiris's design. When Egyptians slept, especially in death, they hoped to do so as he did, with a promise of awakening. The divine lion bed, you've likely seen it, a narrow bed with 4 lion legs and a raised headrest, often found in tombs. This was the lion bed, modeled after the sacred bed of gods like Ra, Osiris, and even Sekhmet, the lioness goddess. The lion represented strength, vigilance, and the power to guard the soul during rest. Divine lion beds were found in temples and used in rituals to cradle sacred objects or even statues of deities. Their placement was intentional, aligned with stars, oriented toward the sunrise, cloaked in linen. A god did not rest casually. Their bed was a universe in miniature. Beds in temple rituals. In sanctuaries deep within temples, hidden from public view, priests cared for statues of the gods as if they were living beings. Every morning they woke the statue, washed it, dressed it, fed it, and every evening they put it to bed. The statue was laid or reclined on a ceremonial bed or platform, often draped in fine cloth. Prayers were whispered. Incense swirled through the chamber. The god, it was believed, rested after a long day of guarding Egypt. This practice wasn't superstition, it was devotion. And for the priest, it was like tucking the cosmos itself into slumber. The bed of healing gods in temples dedicated to Imhotep and Serapis. Beds were used in special rituals of dream incubation. A seeker would lie on a ceremonial bed in the god's presence, waiting for visions. These were not comfortable nights. The beds were often simple platforms, raised slightly, surrounded by symbols of protection, snakes, ankhs, and stars. The goal was to sleep within the presence of the divine, hoping for a cure or revelation. And when the dream came, it was delivered on that bed in the silence of night, with only the god as witness. Pharaohs as sleeping gods. When a pharaoh died, he wasn't just buried, he was divinized. Tombs often show the king lying on a lion bed like Osiris. But the message was more profound. The king had become a god. His body lay on the same type of bed used in divine rituals, surrounded by stars painted on the ceiling, spells on the walls, and guardians in the shadows. Some coffins were even shaped like beds, complete with lion legs and carved linen folds. To sleep in death was to ascend, and the bed? A launchpad to eternity. The bed as barrier. In some myths, gods had to be protected while they slept. In the story of Ra and Apep, the sun god's nightly journey is interrupted by the chaos serpent. Apep, to sleep unguarded, meant risk. That's why protective spells, guardians, and even magical bed legs were crafted, each one designed to repel evil. Some beds were carved with cobra heads, believed to strike at invisible threats. Others had inscriptions underneath, words never meant to be seen, but meant to be heard by spirits lurking below. Divine sleep was dangerous, and beds were shields. The bed of the sky to the Egyptians, the sky itself was a bed. They imagined the goddess Nut arched over the earth, her body studded with stars, her belly the midnight firmament. She swallowed Ra each evening, and he traveled through her body until morning. She was the great canopy, the original sleeping chamber, and lying beneath her stars, Egyptians believed they were watched, sheltered, held. Some tombs were painted to replicate Nut's skybed, so that in death, the sleeper would rest beneath her, eternally safe. Divine rest. Human hope. Why did the gods sleep? Not because they needed rest, but because we did. Their slumber mirrored ours. Their beds became our beds. Their stillness made our stillness sacred. The divine sleep was not weakness, it was renewal. It reminded Egyptians that rest was not laziness, but a right, a return to source. A moment of stillness in a world that moved constantly. And so, even the humblest sleeper on a reed mat in a mud house could close their eyes and believe. I sleep as Osiris sleeps, I dream as Ra dreams. I rest on the lion bed of the gods. In ancient Egypt, death was not an end. It was not a curtain falling nor a void opening. Death was simply a different kind of sleep, and sleep. That was the dress rehearsal. Night after night, Egyptians lay down not just to rest but to practice, to prepare their bodies, their minds, their spirits for the great stillness to come. They believed that every time the eyes closed, the soul rehearsed its journey to the west, the land of the dead. And so, sleep and death were intertwined. Like two reeds in the Nile, let's look at some ways the Egyptians saw sleep and death as one. One, laying down to rise again. The phrase, to lie down in ancient Egyptian could mean many things. To rest, to relax, to sleep, or to die. This wasn't confusion, it was reverence. Lying down at night mimicked the moment of passing. but it also contained the hope of waking. Just as the sun disappeared beneath the horizon each night and rose again, so too did the soul, they believed, return from its nightly voyage. To sleep was to practice this sacred cycle, descent into darkness, confrontation with the unknown, return to light. It was the myth of Osiris and Ra, reenacted every evening by every Egyptian young or old, noble or poor. 2. The eternal sleep. Tombs were often called houses of eternity, but more specifically, they were bedchambers for the dead. Within, the body was placed carefully, lovingly laid out as if sleeping, hands crossed over the chest, eyes closed, lips soft. Paintings on the walls showed reclining figures. Sarcophagi were shaped like human forms in peaceful slumber. Coffin lids bore faces in gentle repose. Even the very act of embalming was framed as a ritual of preparation for eternal rest. The tomb, then, was the final bedroom, the coffin, the last bed, and death, a sleep from which one awoke in the afterlife. 3. Rituals of sleeping forever. In the Book of the Dead, a guidebook for navigating the afterlife, there are many spells that refer to rest, sleep, and dreams. Some titles include Spell for Awakening in the Morning, Spell for Not Sleeping the Sleep of Death, Spell for Sleeping and Rising with Ra. These weren't metaphors. They were practical tools. Just as people said prayers before bed, the dead were equipped with magic words to wake from the long sleep, to rise like the sun, open their eyes in the field of reeds, and not be caught in the sleep of forgetfulness. To die, yes, but not to vanish. 4. Funerary beds. Many burials included actual beds in tombs, especially for nobles or royals. These beds weren't symbols. They were functional for the afterlife, where the deceased would need comfort, familiarity, and protection. The bed was aligned to the east, where the sun rose, ensuring the sleeper would face dawn forever. Some were decorated with lions to mimic the strength of divine sleep. Others were painted with spells on the underside, just as beds in life might bear inscriptions to repel nightmares. Even the dead needed good dreams. 5. Burial in the fetal position. In early Egypt, before the age of pyramids and elaborate coffins, the dead were buried curled up, as if sleeping, as if unborn. This fetal position symbolized the womb of the earth. Death was not the end, but a return, a re-immersion into the Great Mother, a pause before rebirth. Even as funerary practices evolved, the metaphor remained. To die was to sleep. To sleep was to prepare for life again. 6. The Ba sleeps, the Ka watches. In tomb texts, the soul is often divided into Ba and Ka. The Ba would leave the body to explore the heavens just as it did in sleep. But the Ka stayed close, watching, guarding, ensuring the body was safe. In dreams, this dance was nightly. In death, it was eternal. So, sleep was not passive, it was an active journey, a soulful rehearsal for the transition to the next realm. 7. Sleep in the field of reeds. The ideal afterlife for most Egyptians was not clouds and harps. It was the field of reeds, a perfected version of Egypt, crops always ripe, waters always gentle, skies always golden. And in this paradise, the dead lived, loved, worked, and slept. In tomb art, the blessed dead are shown napping under trees, reclining beside loved ones, resting beside rivers. Death wasn't a sprint. It wasn't punishment. It was rest-turned and eternal. 8. The ritual of waking but rest was not the end of the story. Each morning, in the temples of Ra, priests performed a ritual awakening of the god's statue. They washed it, spoke its name, invited it to rise again and bring light to the world. This echoed what the Egyptians hoped for themselves, that one day, in the afterlife, they too would be called awake, gently, with incense and name, with song and sunlight. With love, until then, they slept, and slept well. 9. The legacy of sleep. Even today, the language lingers. In modern Arabic, the word for death mod is often softened when speaking of the departed. Instead, one might say, he has gone to sleep. And in English we say, rest in peace, lay them to rest. Sleep well. These phrases are not accidental, they are echoes, whispers, shadows of a truth the Egyptians knew well. That sleep and death are twins, that to close the eyes is not to end, but to begin again, and that the soul always rises. Do you find these stories fascinating? Let me know in the comments below. Your thoughts matter. Thanks for watching. See you soon.